Hello, I'm Ted Thompson. I'm pleased to welcome you to the 2024 Brooklyn Book Festival's virtual festival day for a conversation with Kiley Reid, Attica Locke, and Joanna Pearson. I'm thrilled to be moderating this discussion. I'm a huge fan of all of their work and of the inherent darkness of college life. Before we begin, I want to let you know that books by these authors in this program can be purchased in the link below. And before we get started, I just wanted to briefly introduce our panelists. Kiley Reid is the author of Such a Fun Age, which was a New York Times bestseller and longlisted for the Booker Prize. Her newest novel, Come and Get It, her newest novel is Come and Get It. Her writing has been featured in the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, Playboy, The Guardian, and others. Attica Locke is a New York Times best-selling author of 5 novels. I think it's 6, actually. Is that right?
It's on bio, yes, 6.
Yeah. Including Bluebird, which won the Edgar Award for Best Novel. She is a winner of the Harper Lee Prize for Legal Fiction, the Ernest Gaines Award for Literary Excellence. She's been shortlisted for the Women's Prize for Fiction and nominated for an LA Times Book Prize. She's also a screenwriter and TV producer with credits that include Empire, When They See Us, and the Emmy-nominated Little Fires Everywhere, for which she won an NAACP Image Award for television writing. She co-created an adaptation of her sister Tembi Locke's memoir from scratch for Netflix, and her newest novel is Guide Me Home. Joanna Pearson is the author of 2 short story collections and a book of poetry, as well as the novel she'll be discussing today. Her stories have appeared in Best American Short Stories, the Best American Mystery and Suspense, and many other publications. She's won a Drew Hines Literature Prize and been a finalist for the Shirley Jackson Award, the Janet Heidinger Kafka Prize, forgive me if I butchered that, and Virginia Literary Arts Awards. She lives in North Carolina, where she works as a psychiatrist. So, campus disturbances. We're here to talk about darkness of campus life in these novels, as well as wherever else we want to take it. I saw the description for this panel and I was really excited about it. And then I started reading the novels and engaging with them. And I realized that they're all very, very different books. But they do share this setting and a kind of view of this sort of cultural space that's all in conversation with each other. So I think that they actually are a lot more similar than they seem at first. I was also curious about the fact that they're all set between 2017 and 2019 in various ways, and they all seem to be in conversation with a kind of cultural swirl of that moment, which has to do with conspiracy and the nature of truth and urban legend and all of the stuff of the topsy-turvy end of the Trump era feels like it's infusing these novels. So we can talk about that as well. Yeah, I also thought about, consumerism, short-sightedness, bias, unexamined motivations and assumptions. It's all in there for all of your work. So let's just start at the easy place. Why college campuses as a setting for these novels? And I'll open it up for whoever wants to jump in with why this was where they began with this project.
I'll start. Sure. Okay. And I'm not being difficult here. My book is definitely on a campus. But for me, it was less about a campus than it was about a dorm. There was something in the very small, claustrophobic hothouse living space that you were in. I feel that, as you start your adult life, there are very few places that you are around people who come from all different backgrounds. I feel like a restaurant is one of those places where some people are working because their dad told them to get a job, and other people are like, I have 5 kids and this is my livelihood. And I feel like that drastic split kind of goes away the older that you get. You just hang out with people who are kind of in the same income bracket as you and work at the same places and are interested in the same things. College is this first time where you are in really close quarters with people from all different types of backgrounds. And there's something about the success in a dorm, like not being fungible. Like it's not a grade, but you are being critiqued all the time. And so I felt like a dorm would be a great place to examine consumerism and young people who are figuring out who they are and trying to buy things to represent who they are and hang those things on their wall. It seemed really claustrophobic in a great way for a novel.
I'll go. I thought it was interesting to, and I actually am the mom of a freshman in college, and I wrote this book in the run up to her leaving home. And when it was pointed out to me, isn't it interesting that you wrote about a young woman who goes missing from a college campus? I was like, what are you talking about? I was going to be thinking about that, but I think I was. And I think there's something about the launch in my book in particular, the girl who has left home to begin college has been extraordinarily sheltered. And so you get a sense of what it is to have your eyes opened when you're suddenly part of a larger kind of world. And also for this character in particular, there's a sense of where her parents have put pressure on her to make choices that are not really her own, and how that leads to the kind of bad things that happen to her.
Yeah, I love what y'all are saying, and I think that's part of what drew me to it too. I think it's interesting, you know, my book is set at University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, which I think in a way it's a place of such idealism. I mean, it's such a hopeful place in that it's there as the flagship institution meant to educate people from, you know, as Kiley was saying, sort of all walks of life brought together. And I was interested in that hopefulness, but also that kind of that clash of people coming together, some of whom are from relatively sheltered backgrounds, and that way in which I do think it is kind of a time of desperate searching for identity, what people believe in, shaking off maybe some of the old beliefs. And then I guess the final thing I'll add is that I now, after over a decade away, have moved back, and I live in a college town, which is the town that I went to college. And there's a strange kind of, you know, transparency overlay feeling of being back in a place in a totally different stage of life. And I thought that was sort of an interesting thing to play with too.
Yeah, actually, I was thinking about the way in which these are all novels about college life, and yet each of you have found a way to have an adult angle of vision onto it. And I was curious about that choice. I mean, you know, obviously, Joanna, your novel toggles between 1999 and 2019, and one of the propulsive aspects of it is the way in which these two time periods are in conversation with each other. And if that is something that was part of the design of the novel from the beginning and what you're interested in exploring, or if it emerged, you know, because of narrative necessity.
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I wish I were a person who didn't operate so much by instinct at the start. That is either part of the magic or part of the failure of my approach. But that idea very quickly came to me, that sort of toggling back and forth. And part of this maybe gets at a specific aspect of campus life that really interested me from that particular time period. I think all campus life is interesting in that kind of collision of people and ideas. But it seemed to me that in the late 90s and early 2000s, there was this really interesting particular strain of evangelical culture, at least in large Southern universities. And so that was something that I wanted to explore, but somehow it did seem necessary then because part of what I was also interested in was kind of this question of long rippling aftermath. And so I wanted to be able to kind of move back into the 2019 present to see the sort of long shadow of those events, and just kind of the ways things had changed and way things hadn't changed. But yeah.
I think mine has this outsider lens because it's built into the book is the end of a trilogy. So it was always going to have this outside perspective because, you know, there's the law enforcement figure, the Darren Matthews, the Texas Ranger, who is coming into this situation. So it was always going to have a kind of hovering spirit to it. Yeah.
For me, the start of this book was reading another book. I knew that I wanted to write about young people and money. I was teaching for the first time in graduate school and I really loved it. And I wanted to keep those voices in my head a bit. And then my husband bought me a book called Paying for the Party: How College Maintains Inequality, written by two sociologists, Elizabeth Armstrong and Laura Hamilton. And I loved it. It was this look at a bunch of different college students from their freshman year to beyond to their careers, marking their trajectories. And the creators invented these pathways, and some people were on the party pathway, the career pathway. And I thought it was fascinating. And my favorite types of nonfiction are the ones that like present scientific data to you and then break your heart with like a quote from a real person. And I remember first reading it, and there was one young woman saying, "Everyone on my floor has a puffy coat. I want a puffy coat." And there was just something so tender and sensitive in that. And some of the young women would get mad at these grown sociologists and say, like, "No one's going to talk to me yet. Why hasn't anyone come to talk to me?" And it seemed like this rich place where you don't know what's going on in your life, and older important people are asking you things and making you feel important, and you don't have to over explain anything because they're just meeting you for the first time. And so I wanted to take that academic like voice and understanding and put it in the world of these young college women.
Yeah, I think, you know, campus novels, when I think of campus novel, I think of like academic satire. You know, like that's the sort of form for so long that it's like a send up of academia and its pettiness and vanity. And you know, for you three, it's not about that. You know, you're interested in like particularly young female experience in this setting, which, you know, in a lot of ways is sort of defined by a kind of predatory danger. And it's manifests in different aspects, I think, in each of these books. But you know, is it that particular? I guess maybe thinking about Attica, the way you were talking about the novel, you know, sort of like teaching you about your own maybe experience as a parent. Like, is there some aspect of this setting that is particularly compelling because it has such a bucolic and sort of hopeful and idealistic surface, right, of higher learning? And you know, they tend to be, campus life tends to be, you know, wholesome in a lot of parts of our imagination. Yeah.
I think it's a mix of that. And also when you speak about young women, you're just learning how to trust your instincts about things. You're just learning clues and cues to walk away from that person, or like you're just trying to figure out how to be in your body in the larger world that's larger than your home life, your church, your school, your high school. And I think it's and you're right, it is the tension between the feeling that I think a lot of us feel about college campuses, which is, you know, everything that we've been fed, everything that you're saying, it's just so lovely, and everyone's wearing tweed and plaid, and they're playing hacky sack on the grounds, and it's all wonderful. And yet I do remember this sense of really only looking back, speaking of with a grown-up's perspective, only looking back do I realize how much I didn't know, how much I was just figuring out, ooh, maybe don't do this, or maybe don't do that, or maybe don't put yourself in this situation. And that I think for young women in particular, it is such a learning. There's no learning curve. It's a jump off a cliff learning. There's no curve. It's just drop. You're just dropped into your kind of adult body and life in the world.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally agree with that. And in fact, it makes me think of the very, very, very earliest kernel of my book for me was actual advice that I got in college from one of my housemates who really said, in the earnest way that one shares things with one's friends to be helpful, she said, well, if you're ever being attacked, what you do is you throw yourself on the ground and you sort of throw a wild fit somewhere between a medical event and a demonic possession. And it's so startling, and it's so kind of like, whoever the attacker is going to be like, this is not worth my time. Like the attacker is going to scamper off and just leave you in peace because you've so thrown them. And it stuck with me for such a long time because I wondered if it would actually work. And B, I think it was that kind of strange contrast again of this place of sort of, at its best, a kind of noble mission of public education at its highest level, bringing all these people from, little corners of the state and beyond. And then the fact that young women were walking around with these little bits of advice, this kind of dark advice, this sort of threat that is still there in this place of such hope and such idealism.
Okay, I agree with both of these things. And I think it's so interesting to turn it over because, yeah, like you are like, am I going to get mugged right now? Is my body safe for the very first time? What would I do? Is that person safe? And at the same time, I feel so strongly about this. I think college is a lot of people's greatest time of their life because of the walkable infrastructure that colleges offer you. It is like this little island where if you need to go to school, if you need to go to laundry, you go to the grocery store, you're just walking everywhere. You have complete control of where you are at all times. And there's less choices, I feel. And so you're not thinking so much about like, am I going to drive to this place? Am I going to do this? Everyone you know and want to hang out with is just right there. And it's like as close as you will get to like a cultural utopia probably in your whole life. Everyone's wearing the same colors because everyone has the same culture. And it's just this little island for 4 or 5 years, however long you get to stay there. So this fear of, what will happen to your body is mixed with like this ease of just getting around that I think a lot of people don't give enough credit to. And in terms of having a quality life and moving your body and having the space and nature to think about who you are.
I agree with that. I think this is not what the conversation's really about, but I think it extends to college town living. And I will say, having been away for so long and then deciding to come back, and obviously I'm not just on campus, I'm not a student, but there is something a little utopian about that college town milieu where you have better options than, maybe another town of similar size, but it's not too much and it's all pretty accessible and walkable. And there is something really lovely and interesting about that.
Also the dorm, thinking about the dorm as its own mini community within the larger campus life, like, so much of, I'm fascinated by dorm living, partly because it's utopian. You're with your friends, your new best friends, and you just walk down the hall and knock on the door and they help you with your homework or your, problem in your love life or whatever. And then, at the same time, you're living, there's no boundaries. You're living in this, you have to have these codes with your roommates in order to have privacy. And, all of the rest of it is also compounds this learning curve that you guys were discussing earlier. This sense of, it's not reality. And yet and often people are exposed to, more vulnerability because of that. And then at the other side of it, spend the rest of their lives, if they've, survived it, longing for that experience in some way, living in a house that's, however many minute drive from anybody they can speak to face to face.
Yeah. Something I still don't have an answer for is understanding why we as people put so much effort into what our dorm room looks like for 9 months. I watched so many YouTube dorm tours because there are thousands of them, and the attention to detail and personality and colors that young people will put into this tiny space. I personally think there's a huge drop off of that level of attention that you put into the space where you live for the rest of your life, and you're only doing it for 9 months or so. And so, of course, a lot of those things are time and energy and children and all that. But it is this bizarre utopia where you can go knock on someone's door and make your room look the way you want it to, and also have little to no boundaries. Yeah.
All right, so let's talk about the time period. I mean, I've shared with people that I think that 2019 will be the year that more fiction is set in than any other time period in the history of our culture. And part of it is because authors just don't want to write about the pandemic if they don't have to. So you just set it in the before times, and that's as close as we can get. And part of it is because there was something kind of destabilizing or worse, topsy-turvy, terrifying about the cultural experience of that moment. We're still living through, so it's a little bit difficult to discuss, with any clarity. But I'm curious if that was, I know Kiley, yours is 2017, but it feels similar. And so I'm curious how present was the cultural moment in your drafting of these works, or is it just when you happened to write the book?
For me, it was purposefully 2019 for several reasons. My trilogy is a kind of treatise on the Trump era period. And also you are correct that it's like built-in foreshadowing. So if my character feels already like, God, this shit is wild and the world is destabilizing and no one's telling the truth, and I feel like this can't go on, and you're reading it knowing, whoa, you have no clue what's coming, it just kind of adds to that tension. And I've had that same experience. You're right, when I'm reading books that are set in 2019. So it was very intentional. And it was also intentional, one, for just, knowing that the pandemic is coming, but also for exactly what you're talking about, the apex of the madness of truth being not anything we were all agreeing on what truth was and how destabilizing that was. That was a very big thing that I wanted to write about.
I love that answer. And to piggyback, I think, on a practical level, I didn't want to mess with, I think I was first starting it in probably 2020, and I just didn't want to mess with that. So like, practically speaking, that felt like it would then become the focus and the topic. And so there was just like a kind of a lazy impulse on my part. But the other thing was, I think that's right, that kind of 2016 through 2019, there was something really interesting to me about what was happening on the internet with, just the wild things. Not that I went too far down this rabbit hole, but I was very fascinated in people falling down the QAnon and this and that, and just so much proliferation of information, some of which is accurate, some of which is not accurate. And I think part of what the project of my book is in a way, it's a story about telling stories. And so how does a catalyzing event like a very infamous murder, how does that then create all these different voices who are sort of meaning making and trying to make sense of it through a Reddit thread, through an urban legend, through, somehow channeling that into their sense of their religious faith. And so I think the timing felt right with the internet in that way, to have it as kind of a Greek chorus of dubious accuracy at times.
I think mine is a little bit more boring. It was like, I was writing the book for a year, and then the pandemic started, and I had lived in Arkansas from 2016 to 17. I wasn't sure when the book was going to take place, but I thought I would be visiting a lot more often. And then the pandemic happened. So I just said, let me have it as I remember it. And that's it. And base it in 2017. But then I do remember there were benefits to that because, and I wanted it to be a certain amount of time after the 2016 election. I remember when I moved to Arkansas and Trump was elected, a lot of my friends from New York City were calling me and saying, like, are you okay down there with those idiots and stuff? And I was like, this feels interesting and inaccurate. Like, I remember I was working at a coffee shop, and the day after Trump got elected, a lot of people were crying that I was like giving coffee to. And I wanted to not have the big drama of the election infiltrate the novel at all. I wanted it to have settled a bit and to portray a little Southern liberal town as I remembered it, and gently, insert the fact that for me personally, I experienced more racism when I was in New York than I did in Arkansas. In these certain circles that you're in, I think it always depends on the place and what that place is going through at the moment. And so it was a cool opportunity to show the Arkansas I remember, which is like everywhere else, a lot of wonderful people and some ignorant people too. So yeah, I was excited to show all those things.
Yeah, I actually noticed that all three books take place on Southern campuses, or the campus life is in the South. And it feels like actually each of you has a personal tie to the campus you're writing about, or maybe just the region you're writing about. And so I'm curious if you want to speak to that a little bit. And maybe we talk about campuses as though they're some monolith, and they're really not, and they're very different, even if you read each of these books side by side, you're not actually writing about the same place. So maybe speak a little bit about what it was specifically regionally about the campus you were imagining.
My answer will be easy in that the crux of this entire trilogy is about rural East Texas. And so it was going to be a campus in rural East Texas. And I think this particular college is very emblematic of a smaller Texas college. And so my answer is very, very simple. It was kind of the decision was made for me, but I also, similar to what Kylie's saying, like, or also to Joanna, like, we were like all starting to write these books like as the pandemic was taking off. I remember I thought my book was going to take place in Laredo. And I couldn't how was I going to get to Laredo? I don't know. Let me get back to what I know, because I didn't know if we were ever leaving our house again. So that's my very easy answer.
Yeah, I'm with you. For me, I was living and working in New York City, and then my husband got a job opportunity in Arkansas. And that summer, I took Ted's class at Sackett Street and took maybe 100 pages of my novel to Arkansas to live with my husband and just try to apply to graduate school again, because I'd just been rejected from like 9, 10, 11 schools. And so I just lived and worked at a coffee shop. I worked at a weird website called massageatworkusa.com, writing essays about massages. I know nothing about massages, but that's what I did for a couple $100 a month. And it was a great choice to move to this wonderful college town. Fayetteville is beautiful. It's a lot cheap. Well, now it's a little expensive, but it was really cheap. I remember I could go out with $10 in my pocket and know I could get 2 drinks, maybe more. And I was sleeping for the first time in a really long time from working a hard job as a receptionist. And I definitely developed an affinity for the place. And I was really drawn to 2 things. One, I love normalness in books. Like the other day, I was thinking about that book, The Knockout Queen. And I think the young kid in it works at CVS. And there's something that like is electrifying in me, like when someone works somewhere where I can picture exactly where they are. And I think that when people hear campus novel, they think Ivy Leagues, cathedrals, top of the top, and most people are going to state schools. And so I was drawn to Arkansas in that way. And 2, a lot of people, when I was doing interviews for the book, I told them I was writing about like Southern young people at school. I wasn't really sure where else I was doing besides that at the point. And a lot of them would say to me, oh, Fayetteville, that's not the South. That's like Austin. That's like Denver. That's not the South. And then a lot of people in Fayetteville would be like, no, we are the South. Like we have those values. And so I love a place that is a bit in limbo geographically and carries a bit of a gray line. And so that's where Arkansas came in for me.
Yeah, 100%. I agree with what both of y'all are saying. Yeah, and I also agree. I like the having there be campus novels that are not set in the, august Ivy Leagues. Partly because it is that really, it feels like a more distinct kind of friction to have a place that is almost decidedly blue, perhaps in a surrounding kind of red sea of red around it. And I also, and maybe this is a kind of vulnerable tenderness I tried to channel and put into my characters a little bit, but it comes from my own experience. I mean, I remember growing up in a little small town in Western North Carolina, and sort of in that like naive but sort of beautiful way, I was just hungry for intellectualism and like, people who read The New Yorker and ate sushi, which, I mean, that was just sort of like unheard of to me. And I remember showing up in Chapel Hill, which might as well have been Paris, France. I mean, it was just like so a different place, and thinking like, I want to, like, I want to sort of reinvent myself and make my dorm room look the right way to signify that I'm one of the interesting people. And there was this moment where a fancy girl from Charlotte walked into a coffee shop, and at that time we didn't even have coffee shops. And she very confidently went up and said, "I would like a Darjeeling, please." And I remember thinking, I have no idea what that is, but it's the most beautiful word I've ever heard. It's just tea. I mean, later I found out it doesn't taste that good, but I was like, that to me sort of like crystallized everything that, like, going from elsewhere in a southern state to the big college town. And I just think that is so interesting to have young people who don't know who they are and to have them displaced and hungry,
Mhm. A fancy girl from Charlotte is so good.
She
I would
was
read that.
she was so fancy. And like to this day, I still think about how Darjeeling, I still think it's a beautiful word. And I don't think it's a particularly good tea, but like at the time I was like, it must taste like just heaven in your mouth when you get it, if you know what it is.
I mean, that is definitely the writer, the future writer at work, you're more interested in the sound of the word than the taste of the tea. And you're right, it is a beautiful word now. It's lodged forever in my mind. Okay, so I want to open it up to questions from folks who are tuning in, and we have one right here, but if I think there's a way to add questions to the chat, and it'll get to us. So this question comes from Sarah. Could you please talk about the concept of community support or lack thereof in your books?
I'll go in the sense of, I think that a lot of my book, and even though it masquerades as the, I don't want to give anything away, that the answer to the crime is on the campus, it kind of actually isn't. I think my book is talking a lot about healthcare. She comes from this a company town, the girl that goes missing. And so this may not answer Sarah's question, but I was very interested in reminding myself and people about community support in the sense of what government is for, and that it is appropriate, it is not shameful to have needs and to expect that these needs be filled by your government. So I don't want to take up any more time than that, but I was interested in community support from the point of view of the reason why we gather in tribes and counties and cities and towns is to support each other.
I'll go next. That fits in perfectly with my novel. I think I write about Millie, she's an RA, and she is extremely responsible and energetic. And within the novel, she, one of the young women that she meets is Peyton, who is also Black, like Millie. But Millie sees her and she's like, "Oh, I'm gonna like be this girl's like big sister." She's like a little awkward, like I'm gonna step in and help her out. And Peyton's like, "Do not come near me. Like I do not want anything to do with you." And so while Millie is doing a lot of other things like exploring her sexuality and trying to buy a house, in terms of community support, she keeps trying to get in with Peyton and have this girl, trust her a little bit. And Millie kind of misses out on another student that desperately needs support, in terms of mental health and loneliness. And so that's what's happening on the surface. I'm super interested in jobs in college where young people are paid so menially to do the biggest jobs ever. Like have people come to them when they don't know, what to do with their mental health, from RAs to student athletes. I think there's a lot of jobs on campus where students are viewing it as a really wonderful opportunity that they can put on their resume, but is incredibly taxing, and they aren't often trained in the way that I think that they should be. Yeah.
Those are great answers. Yeah, I think thinking about Sierra's question, I think that in my story, as I mentioned, I was thinking about sort of both what faith, traditions, religious belief, like what that potentially offers us. I think there's this desire for both community, but also a desire for a transcendent experience. And I think maybe that's sort of the promise. I also think there's this desire for kind of finding community that helps you with your narrative sense making of like what is happening, especially when there's a big, catastrophic event at the center of the story. I hope this doesn't suggest a bleak worldview, but I feel like in my book, a lot of the means of community support, like through religion, through internet chat rooms, through kind of finding your in-group, it sort of goes awry, which doesn't mean I'm not hopeful about the best possible versions of community support, but I think maybe I was interested in sort of the ways that we seek it, and sometimes it doesn't always pan out, although I remain hopeful for its best versions.
I'm actually interested right now in thinking about all of your books and the way that, well, just the question of genre, I guess, is a question I'm always interested in. I think that at least with both Joanna and Attica's work, you have, once somebody goes missing or once you have a body, your narrative is propelled into the stratosphere. Like there's all these great questions that the reader is asking themselves and they want to know. And as a writer, you're like, all right, we're cooking with gas. And then you also realize that you've set up a whole series of expectations that you either have to meet or subvert. And I'm curious as to how you think about it as either liberating or restricting, and where you fall when working with, and then even Kiley in your work, like, even if you would call it, just straight literary fiction, it's still a genre, right? It has a series of expectations that the book is posing to the reader. And as a writer, you're always either conscious of it or you're told about it after the fact. But I'm curious where you fall in your process of working within each of your genres.
I will say with this book in particular, I was as I was writing it, nervous and concerned because I felt like I wasn't following the expectations. That even though I was clearly writing a mystery, there was an emotional mystery at the core of the story that was as important, if not more important to me than the story of the classic, what happened to this young woman. So I got nervous while writing it, but it was the book that I had to write. So I just had to do it, but I was very nervous.
I mean, for me, and I suspect I'm in a slightly different position from Kiley and Attica here. I mean, for me, in the creation, it was utterly liberating because I I'm kind of like typing away. No one's waiting for the next Joanna Pearson book. So which in a way totally frees me up. And I think I knew from the start that, yeah, I definitely lean pretty darn literary fiction, I would say. But I think the moment you introduce a death, a murder, a question, even if, as I kind of wanted to do, I still wanted to give the satisfaction of you still get the whodunit, because I think it would be too frustrating for me too, as a reader, if I didn't do that. But in a way, the real part of the book is what I think, Attica, you're saying, the emotional mystery. I really wanted to see that sort of like multi-perspective long impact of this event. And so I would not have framed my book as like a thriller per se, but I think because of down the road later, I think somehow that word has gotten applied, and I think that really throws people off sometimes, I think, in their reception. And so now I kind of have more feelings about genre, but in the act of creation, I was just having a good time. I mean, I was having a real grand experience until after the fact. So.
Yeah, I'm with you. I don't really think about, well, I try not to think about those things when I'm writing about, but of course it creeps in. But I agree with Attica. You have to just write the book that you want to write, and you can't really put it in a category. The way I try to think about my work is that I want to think about my books like outfits coming down a runway, where I want someone to understand, like, that's a Kiley Reid piece, but this is a ball gown. This is a ready to wear. Like, that's all of my books. And so I think this year I started understanding too, like, how much a person is bringing to the read of your novel, like whether they just read Toni Morrison for the first time, or they just had a breakup, or they're like really trying to read about Black people for the first time. People are bringing so much different stuff in that it's like pointless to not do exactly what you want to do. And I think my second book is a really different take than my first one. My second book is about stuff and consumption and brands, and about who we are when we're alone. And a friend of mine told me that, Such a Fun Age, my first book, is like a really fun sitcom that you want to binge. And this is like a film docuseries. And so that's the way that I see these things. And not everyone likes both of those types of books. But when I look at like what I want to do for a canon, you just kind of forget about what people will think about the genre association. But I do, I'm going to do this and say, I also think that literary fiction, on one side, literary fiction means that you're writing about the inner depth of human behavior, and you're seeing beneath, the nuance of a person, and you can be surprised endlessly. And that is beautiful. On the other side, I think literary fiction is a term that makes people feel smart when they purchase like a $26 hardcover. And there's plenty of depth in, some YA books as well. Not all of them, but some of them. And so I try not to get too wrapped up in, writing towards the title that I know I'll get put under, because it's just going to end up boring me at the end of the day. And I try and put in whatever I think is interesting.
I couldn't agree more with the, like, write the thing that you might like to read. And I think often what I want to read is a little bit betwixt and between.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, go ahead, Attica.
I've also called, speaking of Toni Morrison, I've also called Beloved a crime novel. It's a moral crime of slavery. It's also a horror novel. It's all these kinds of things.
I like that a lot. Yeah, completely. It's just, as soon as you put a title on it, like, I think that as a writer, you're like, oh, but of course, like, it has to sell. You want your book worked in the hands of other people. And that part, it's hard, but it's none of your business after that. Yeah.
I think that's a wonderful place to wrap up. Thank you all. And everyone, please remember, you can order books in the link below, and please consider making a donation to the Brooklyn Book Festival, which is celebrating its 19th year of presenting free literary programming. And a reminder that if you're in New York City this week, join us for our citywide bookends and our in-person Children's Day and Festival Day that take place on September 28th and 29th in downtown Brooklyn. Thank you all so much for a wonderful conversation.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you very much. This was lovely. Have a good day. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah.